Welcome to Asian Tribune's Monday Geopolitical Analysis, Power and Global Politics. This is where we examine the forces of power, influence and strategy that shape today's global landscape. If you value clear, independent analysis, we invite you to subscribe to the Asian Tribune channel and stay connected with our weekly discussions. Thank you for joining us. Let's begin.
Hello and welcome back to another deep dive. Today is Saturday, January 17th, 2026. And look, if you have been anywhere near a news feed, a television, or frankly, just, glancing at the notifications on your phone for the last few weeks, you know exactly where we're going today.
It's been pretty hard to miss. The images coming out of Iran have just been dominating the global conversation. It feels like every time you refresh the page, there's a new development.
Exactly. We're seeing the headlines everywhere. Massive unrest, crowds in the streets, tear gas, and a very intense, very visible government crackdown. But you know us. We don't just want to read the headline, doom scroll for 5 minutes and then move on. We want to know what's actually happening beneath the surface. To do that, we've pulled a comprehensive analysis. It's titled, Iran's Winter of Unrest, the 2026 Crisis Analysis. This report covers everything from the initial sparks in late 2025 right up through, well, today.
And this document is so crucial because it helps us connect the dots. It's very easy to see a protest on the news and just think, okay, people are angry, something exploded. But this analysis, it really digs into the why and the how. It treats the situation less like a random explosion and more like a structural engineering failure. It shows us the stress fractures that have been forming for years before the bridge finally gave way.
And that's our mission today. We are going to move beyond just clashes and crowds. We want to understand why this specific wave of protests is different, how it actually started, because it wasn't just overnight, and what it signals for the future of the region.
And I think the hook here, the thing that really grabs you when you read this report, is the realization that while, yes, economic pain lit the fuse, the explosion is about something much, much deeper. We're looking at a structural crisis in the relationship between the state and society.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because usually when we hear about protests, there's a specific trigger, right? A law gets passed, a price goes up. So let's rewind the tape. Take us back to late December 2025. What started all of this?
To understand the start, you don't look at the parliament or the politicians. You have to look at the wallet of the average citizen. The immediate catalyst was purely economic. The report details a really grim picture leading up to the end of the year. You had rapid inflation and the continued depreciation of the Iranian rial.
When we talk about depreciation in this context, just so we're all on the same page, what does that actually look like for a normal person living in Tehran or, Shiraz?
It means your money is worth less every single day. Imagine getting paid on Monday, and by Friday, that same amount of money buys you maybe 20% less at the grocery store. It creates this constant sort of low-level panic. The source mentions skyrocketing prices for basic necessities. We're talking about a crushing decline in purchasing power.
It's the classic kitchen table crisis. You can't put food on the table, you can't fill up your car to get to work.
Precisely. And that hits you where it hurts most. Food and fuel. When the price of chicken or gasoline doubles in a short window, you aren't talking about tightening your belt. You are talking about survival. And economic protests, they aren't new in Iran. We've seen them before. But here's where it gets interesting, and where the report notes a significant shift. This didn't stay about money for long.
That was one of the things that jumped out at me in the reading. It started with, we can't afford bread. But it morphed into something else entirely, almost overnight.
Exactly. The chants changed. They moved from specific economic grievances, fix the prices, subsidize the fuel, to much broader political and social demands. The public frustration just boiled over regarding governance, corruption, and a lack of transparency.
So we went from, I can't afford this, to the system that is making me unable to afford this is broken.
That is the perfect way to frame it. The report highlights that people started demanding that limited political freedoms be expanded. It became a challenge against the entire governance structure. The economy was the breaking point, the straw that broke the camel's back, but the underlying pressure came from long-standing systemic issues that have been building for years.
It's like the economy was the match, but the pile of wood had been stacking up for a decade.
A very, very apt analogy. And that transition from economic survival to political defiance is what makes this 2026 crisis so volatile. Usually a government can try to, buy its way out of an economic protest issue, a subsidy, lower a tax, but you can't buy out a demand for political freedom.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Once the contract is broken on that level, a check in the mail doesn't fix it. So we know why they are protesting. Now let's talk about who is protesting, because sometimes you see these movements and it's very specific. It's just university students or it's just factory workers in the industrial belts.
Yeah.
What does the anatomy of this movement look like?
This is one of the most critical findings in the analysis. This isn't an isolated group. The report emphasizes that this movement has a wide social base.
Meaning it's everybody.
Essentially, yes. It cuts across class and regional lines. You have students, sure, who are often the vanguard of these things. But you also have laborers, teachers, and this is the big one, small business owners and significant portions of the urban middle class.
Why is the middle class and the business owner involvement so significant?
Because those groups usually value stability. They have assets to protect. When the shopkeeper, the bazaari, closes up shop and stands next to the student and the factory worker, it signals that the status quo has become untenable. Untenable even for the people who usually try to just keep their heads down. That is a very dangerous mix for any government trying to maintain control. When the shopkeeper, the student, and the factory worker are all on the street for the same reason, you have a unified front.
And it's not just in Tehran, right? The report mentioned geography.
Right. It's not just the capital. This has spread to multiple major cities, Mashhad, Isfahan, but also into provincial towns. It's geographically dispersed, which strains the security forces because they can't just focus all their attention on one square in one city.
That leads me to the tactics. If you have this many different types of people, grandmothers, mechanics, tech workers, how are they organizing? Is there a leader? Is there a face on a poster?
That is the fascinating part, and it really distinguishes this from movements we might have seen 20 years ago. The analysis points out 3 distinct features of this 2026 wave. First, there's greater coordination at the grassroots level, like neighborhood by neighborhood. Second, and this is key, it's a decentralized structure.
So there isn't one person you can just arrest to make it all stop.
Exactly. Think of it like the difference between a spider and a starfish. If you cut the head off a spider, the organism dies. That's a centralized organization. But this is a starfish. If you cut off a leg, it grows a new one. The leadership is everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
That makes the standard decapitation strike, where the state just arrests the leaders. Completely ineffective.
It does. It actually might make things worse because there's no one to negotiate with, even if the state wanted to. And third, there's a strong symbolic rejection of state authority. They aren't just asking for policy changes. They're rejecting the symbols of the state itself in public spaces.
The resilience mentioned in the source is wild. It says they persisted despite really harsh security measures. It feels like the decentralized nature creates this hydra effect. You cut off one head and another 2 appear.
It does. And that resilience is what forced the state to change its playbook. Which brings us to the government's response.
And let's pivot to that, because the government didn't just sit back and watch this happen. Segment 3 of our deep dive is really about the state's playbook, security and silence. How did they handle this?
Well, as you might expect, given the history, the state responded with a security-first strategy. The source details the deployment of riot police, plainclothes security forces, who are often harder to spot but very effective at intimidation, and elements of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
So they brought out the heavy hitters immediately.
They did. The tactics involved mass arrests, targeting activists, journalists, protesters. They used force to clear public spaces and put tight restrictions on any kind of assembly.
But the thing that really affects everyone, not just the people on the street, is the digital aspect. The report talks about a severe internet blackout.
This is the silence part of the strategy. Authorities imposed severe internet restrictions, significantly limiting access to global platforms and social media. We're talking about throttling speeds so videos can't upload, or just cutting off mobile data entirely in specific hotspots.
And there are always 2 sides to why this happens, right? What's the official line?
The state's justification is that it's essential for national security. They argue that chaos online leads to chaos in the streets. They say, we are shutting this down to prevent rioters from organizing violence.
And the critics.
The critics view it as a tool to prevent protest coordination, as we discussed earlier. If you can't communicate, you can't organize a rally. But it's also to limit the flow of images abroad. They want to reduce international scrutiny. If the world can't see what's happening, it's harder for foreign governments or the UN to condemn it.
But think about the collateral damage of that. The source mentions the impact on daily life. And this is where I think the story gets really complex.
It's massive, and this is where the irony comes in, perhaps the tragic irony of the whole situation. I talked about how the economy started this, right?
Right. It was the price of bread and fuel.
Well, in 2026, you cannot separate the internet from the economy. The internet is the economy. When you implement a blackout to stop protests, you disrupt banking services. You stall everyday business logistics. You prevent small businesses, many of whom operate entirely on social media platforms, from selling their goods.
So to stop the protests about the bad economy, they implement a measure that makes the economy even worse.
Precisely. It disrupts businesses and discourages investment, which compounds the very economic hardship that drove people to the streets in the first place. It creates a feedback loop of instability. You're essentially fighting a fire by pouring gasoline on it.
That is heavy. It really humanizes the cost of these tactics. It's not just about not being able to check Instagram or watch a movie. It's about not being able to run your small business, process a credit card payment, or find out if your cousin is in jail.
And speaking of jails and the human cost, we have to look at the fallout. The report has a specific section on human rights and the social impact.
What are we seeing there?
Human rights organizations have raised serious concerns. The report lists excessive use of force, arbitrary detentions, and a lack of due process. But beyond the physical toll, there's a psychological one.
The anxiety for the families must be just unbearable.
The report highlights exactly that. Families are unable to get information about arrested relatives because of the communication blackout. Imagine your child goes out to a protest and doesn't come back. You can't call, you can't text, you can't check online. It deepens the public anxiety and reinforces that gap between the state and the society. It's a very traumatic experience for the collective psyche of the nation.
It reinforces the idea that the state is an adversary rather than a protector.
That is the perfect way to put it.
So while all of this is churning inside Iran, what's happening outside, how is the world responding? I mean, we are sitting here reading this report, so obviously information's getting out.
The international reaction has been strong. Western governments and international institutions have criticized Tehran heavily for suppressing dissent and restricting freedoms. You have the standard diplomatic condemnations and calls to restore internet access.
And how does Tehran respond to that criticism? Because they usually have a counter-narrative. They don't just say, yeah, you're right.
No, they certainly don't. And it's important to understand their perspective to get the full picture of the geopolitical dynamic. The leadership frames the protests as foreign-influenced destabilization attempts.
So it's not us, it's outside agitators.
Right. They view it as part of a broader geopolitical pressure campaign. They look at Western support for the protesters and say, see, this is a plot to weaken us. And this narrative is crucial for them because they use it to justify the tighter internal controls.
So if they can convince their base that this is an attack from the outside, then the crackdown becomes a defense of the nation rather than repression of the people.
Exactly. It creates the standoff. The West criticizes, Iran says, you are meddling, and the cycle just reinforces itself. It reinforces Iran's confrontational stance toward the West and deepens their isolation. It essentially gives the hardliners more ammunition to say, we can't trust the West. We need to lock things down even tighter.
So we have the economic trigger, the decentralized movement, the crackdown, the digital blackout, and the international fallout. That's a lot of moving parts. What does this all mean?
Let's move to our synthesis. If we look at the last few weeks, what is the big takeaway?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the analysis offers three major structural conclusions. These are the things you should, write down if you're taking notes. First, economic stress is a powerful continuing destabilizer. As long as inflation and currency depreciation continue, the fuel for unrest is always there.
It's not going away. The conditions that created the spark are still present. No. Second, public discontent is now systemic, not just episodic. It's not just a flare-up, it's a chronic condition. It's a deep-seated frustration with the entire operating system of the country. And third, repression might clear the streets temporarily, and the report notes that the state has reasserted control for now, but it doesn't fix the root causes.
Putting a lid on a boiling pot without turning down the heat.
That is the perfect metaphor. The pressure is still building inside. The long-term risk here, as the report outlines, is eroding state legitimacy. You can force compliance, but you can't force loyalty. And you certainly can't build a functioning, thriving economy on a foundation of coercion.
And this deepens the internal debates over reform.
Right, it does. It leaves the country in a very fragile equilibrium. The government is buying time, but the cost of that time is getting more and more expensive, both politically and economically.
It sounds like we're looking at a situation where the crisis isn't really over, it's just changed shape. It's gone from a loud crisis on the street to a quiet, simmering crisis in the homes and businesses.
That is the reality. The warning signal has been lit.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. It's complex, it's heavy, but it's so vital to understand the world we're living in right now. To recap the journey, we started with a spike in fuel and food prices in late 2025. That economic pain mutated into a decentralized political movement involving everyone from students to shopkeepers.
Which was then met with a physical and digital crackdown that, ironically, damaged the economy even further.
And now we're in this uneasy silence, where the streets might be clearer, but the anger hasn't gone anywhere.
The state has won the battle for the streets this week, but the war for stability is far from over. The underlying drivers remain completely unresolved.
That brings us to the end of today's deep dive into Iran's winter of unrest. But before we go, I want to leave you with a thought.
This is something to mull over.
We talked about that feedback loop. If the primary tool to stop protests, shutting down the internet and commerce, actually worsens the economic problems that caused the protests in the first place, are we looking at the end of a crisis, or are we just watching the beginning of a much more volatile, self-perpetuating cycle?
It raises the question, how long can a system survive when its immune response attacks its own life support?
Something to think about. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Stay curious.